After Estelle Harris passed away in 2022, her modest yet charming home in Palm Desert, California sat quietly on the market for months. Though the real estate listing painted it as a sunny mid-century gem with vintage character and desert serenity, buyers came and went, always backing out before the paperwork could be signed. Locals whispered about strange noises and odd energy. But in a town where the sun is blinding and heat plays tricks on the mind, such talk was dismissed as gossip. It wasn't until late 2023 that the property finally sold to a young couple from Portland named Josh and Karina Miller. They weren't Hollywood people. They didn't even realize whose home they were buying until after moving in, when a neighbor casually mentioned, "You know this used to be Estelle Harris's place, right? You know George's mom from Seinfeld?" That made Karina laugh. She'd loved Estelle's shrill comedic delivery, the way her voice practically pierced through a screen. But the idea of the house carrying her energy, that felt like a stretch. First, the house was quiet, almost too quiet. Built in 1962, it had thick walls that muffled sound, and the desert breeze barely touched the interior. Still, Karina swore she kept hearing a faint voice, not a whisper, but a nasally murmur, like someone arguing with themselves just out of earshot. Josh thought it was electrical. "This whole place needs rewiring," he said, especially after the hallway light flickered every time they talked about painting over the old beige walls Estelle had apparently adored. When Karina made a joke about tearing down the tacky green curtains, they found them ripped off the rod the next morning. No broken hardware, no wind, just a neatly folded heap on the floor, like someone had made a point. More unsettling than the noises or the cold spots, and yes, there were cold spots in a desert house no less, was the mirror. The full-length mirror in the master bedroom wasn't part of the original listing. In fact, Karina was sure it hadn't been there during the open house. It had an ornate, vaguely gaudy frame that clashed with the room's minimalist furniture. When she tried to move it to the garage, she slipped on the tile and broke her wrist. After that, she left it alone. But sometimes, at night, she'd wake to the soft tap-tap-tap of fingernails against glass. When she sat up, the mirror stood still. Yet she swore every time the reflection was slightly off. Her own image lagged. Her eyes blinked a fraction of a second too late. Once, she saw what she swore was an older woman behind her frizzy hair, arms crossed, a tight, disapproving scowl. But when she turned around, the room was empty. One night, Josh brought home a friend from work, a skeptical tech guy named Derek who offered to set up EMF detectors just for fun. They laughed about it over beers and installed a few around the house. That night, at 3:11 a.m., every detector went off at once. Their phones lit up with alerts, and the house filled with the sharp scent of hairspray, despite no one using any. Derek left before sunrise and never returned. By March 2024, the Millers were sleeping in separate rooms. Josh had grown withdrawn, saying he kept having dreams where he was being screamed at for things he never did, being accused, berated, and guilt until he woke up sweating, with Estelle's voice still ringing in his ears. "It's like someone's still rehearsing an argument in this place," he said once. "Like she's still running lines." Karina found that some of her own phone recordings had picked up background chatter, scratchy, almost like a distant television, but always the same tone. A shrill, impatient voice. The voice of a mother scolding someone. They brought in a local spiritual consultant. Not quite a priest, not quite a medium. He walked through the house in silence for almost half an hour before stopping by the mirror. He placed a hand on the frame and went still. When he finally spoke, he said simply, "She's still here. She's watching. And she doesn't like change." By summer, the Millers had moved out. The listing went up again, and again offers trickled in and disappeared. The mirror was never removed. It remains in the master bedroom, a clause in the real estate contract: now do not attempt to move or dispose of mirror. Neighbors say that on hot, still evenings, when the wind dies down and the desert sky burns orange, you can sometimes hear her voice through the window, sharp, nagging, unmistakable. "She's not gone," one neighbor said quietly, folding their arms just like the figure in the mirror. "She just hasn't had her final line yet." Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. By mid-July, The sun seemed to bear down heavier than usual on the streets of the neighborhood. The desert air hung dense, not with heat but with a strange stillness. Even the wind, which normally rattled the mesquite branches and sent the brittle palm fronds clattering, had stopped visiting. The house, seated on a quiet cul-de-sac with a low stucco wall and gravel front yard, didn't look haunted. Not in the classical sense. No gnarled trees or peeling paint. The bougainvillea still bloomed in bursts of magenta along the patio. But somehow it felt haunted. Inside, Karina had started talking aloud when she was alone. At first, it was just muttering under her breath. Little things like, "I'm just folding towels, that's all." Or, "I'll leave the mirror alone, don't worry." But soon it evolved. Now she'd announce her plans aloud, where she was going, what she was about to clean, which drawer she needed to reorganize, as if the house required prior notice, like she was asking permission. Josh had grown pale. He'd started staying longer at work, sometimes returning after dark with that glassy-eyed, sleep-deprived expression she barely recognized anymore. At night, he kept a white noise machine by his bed, something he'd never used in their Portland apartment. He said it helped drown out the voice. But Karina could still hear it. Through the walls, through the floors. Always faint, like a television playing in the next room, just loud enough to recognize the tone. Never the words. They both stopped watching Seinfeld. One morning in August, Karina stood in the kitchen, barefoot on the cool tile, holding a bowl of cereal she didn't want to eat. Her eyes were fixed on the sliding glass door that looked out over the sun-bleached patio. The curtains there, the same ones Estelle had apparently chosen decades ago, had returned. They had thrown them out in May. She remembered stuffing them into a black trash bag with a guilty apology whispered under her breath. Josh had driven them to a nearby Goodwill drop-off, swearing he saw the bag placed in the bin himself. And yet, here they were again. The exact same curtains. Same texture. Same avocado green hue with the faint vine pattern woven into the fabric. Hung perfectly, without a wrinkle, drawn half open to let in the morning glare. She didn't touch them. She didn't tell Josh. She just stood there for a long time, her cereal going soggy in her hand, watching as the curtains rustled just slightly even though there was no wind outside. It got worse with the radio. Josh had installed a Bluetooth speaker in the living room to play music while they worked or cooked. One Sunday afternoon, while they were assembling a new bookcase, the speaker crackled and began playing something neither of them had cued. It was an old broadcast, scratchy, AM-quality audio of a 1950s soap opera. They let it play for a moment, thinking maybe it was a podcast glitch. Then the static cut in, and Estelle's unmistakable voice came through. It wasn't a recording they recognized. Not from any show or interview. It sounded like a rehearsal. She was shouting, but not for laughs. Her tone was sharp, full of frustration. No, that's not the line. That's not the damn line. Who gave you that rewrite?" Then silence. The speaker clicked off. Josh turned it upside down, checking the brand. "That's not possible," he mumbled. "There's no mic. It's not a radio." He shut it off for good. A week later, it turned itself on at 3:11 a.m. and played the same voice again, only this time she was laughing. Dry, high-pitched, mocking laughter that echoed through the house like it was coming from the walls themselves. Karina began keeping a notebook, not of dreams, of rules, things that made the activity worse. She didn't like to call it haunting, not even to herself. She thought of it as resistance, as though the house itself, or whatever part of Estelle still lingered, was simply resisting change. Resisting them. The list grew slowly. Don't criticize the furniture aloud. Don't play music too loud after 7 p.m. Don't cover the mirror. Don't enter the master bathroom after midnight. Never, ever talk about selling the house while inside it. She broke that last rule once. She had been pacing the hallway on the phone with her sister, whispering into the receiver, "I think we need to get out. Josh isn't sleeping. I'm not eating. I swear something's here." That night, she found her phone shattered on the floor beneath the hallway mirror. The call had been recorded. The playback was garbled, but in the background just faintly there was a hiss, like someone whispering ungrateful over and over again. The hallway grew colder by the week. It wasn't the kind of cold that could be fixed with insulation or blocked vents. This cold clung to you. It settled in the joints, crept along the backs of arms, made every light switch feel like it was dipped in ice. Karina tried to take photos to show Josh. Sometimes the hallway looked perfectly normal, but other times the pictures were distorted like the lens had warped. One photo showed a shadowy outline at the end of the hall, hunched and narrow, standing perfectly still beside the closet. When she showed it to Josh, he refused to look at it again. That was the same night he moved out temporarily, he said. Just a few days at a friend's house in Cathedral City. Time to clear his head. He never came back. Karina stayed. Not because she wanted to, because something made her feel like she couldn't leave. As if walking away from the house would trigger something worse. Like it had claimed a part of her already, and walking out the door without permission would tear that piece away permanently. She stopped talking to friends. Let the mail pile up. Drew all the curtains. She slept in the living room now on the sofa, facing the hallway. Every night she lit a candle and whispered, "It's your house. I know. I'm just staying for a little while longer." Sometimes, in the silence that followed, she swore she heard a breathy voice behind her ear. A woman's voice, still rehearsing lines. It was September when Karina stopped marking the days. The calendar in the kitchen still hung on August, a photo of a redwood forest, its corners curling from the heat. She no longer touched it. She barely used the kitchen at all. The fridge hummed dully, a sound that sometimes, for just a second, almost resembled a voice clearing its throat. She stopped trying to cook. The food spoiled. She lived off cereal and crackers, water from the tap. Once, she poured herself a glass of wine. It shattered in her hand before the first sip. Her palm still bore the scar, thin and pale, shaped almost like a letter E. The house grew darker. Not because the lights failed, though they flickered now more often than not, but because the sun stopped reaching the windows the way it used to. Shadows arrived earlier each evening, stretched longer across the walls. The green curtains, now firmly back in place and untouchable, filtered what little daylight remained through their aging threads. They cast the living room in a sickly, olive tint. A theater without an audience. She began hearing her name at night, not whispered, announced. From somewhere between the hallway and the mirror. Karina. It was never angry, never warm, just sharp, like a cue. One morning, she woke on the living room sofa to find a chair moved. A simple wooden dining chair, it had been dragged across the tile, leaving a long gray scuff that snaked from the kitchen to the hallway. At the end of the path, the chair sat neatly in front of the mirror, facing it, square, intentional. There was no note, no explanation, but it was clear what was being asked of her. She didn't sit in it. Not that day. She pushed it aside and returned to the couch, though her eyes were drawn to the mirror for hours, her body cold beneath a wool blanket, her mind buzzing with unspoken lines. That night, the chair was back in the same position, this time with a hairbrush placed on the seat. The brush was old, wooden with yellowed bristles. Not hers. She didn't own anything like it. She began to dream in black and white, grainy textures, stage lights, a woman's back as she paced across an empty rehearsal room, high-heeled footsteps clicking, stopping, spinning. Karina always watched from the mirror, never moving, only observing. Sometimes, she'd wake with mascara on her fingertips, even though she hadn't worn makeup in weeks. Once, she found a lipstick print on her pillow. Ruby red. Matte. She didn't own lipstick. The dreams continued. The woman in them, Estelle, though younger, paced endlessly, rehearsing the same argument over and over. You don't call. You don't write. You left me in that house like I was nothing. Like I was just gone. Each repetition more furious, more desperate. Then the silence, longer and longer pauses, as if waiting for a cue that never came. One afternoon, Karina gave in. She drew the curtains in the hallway, lit the candle she now kept in an old ceramic bowl, sat in the wooden chair before the mirror, felt rehearsed, like she'd done it before even though she hadn't. She stared at her reflection. First it was just her. Then the air changed. The light shifted. though the candle stayed steady. The room around her grew indistinct like a backdrop that had dimmed while the spotlight burned on her face. In the mirror, her reflection remained, but the room behind it was no longer her house. It was a stage, a small one, black floor, thick curtains, a single velvet armchair in the center, and someone was sitting in it, watching her. The figure didn't speak, but Karina did. "I'm here." Her voice sounded unfamiliar, flatter, more controlled. The figure leaned forward just slightly, then raised one finger to her lips. Shoo! The mirror went dark. That night, Josh called. The first time in nearly a month. His voice was shaky, full of apologies. He said he missed her, that he wasn't sleeping either, that he'd had dreams, that he heard her name not in his head, but out loud, in his apartment, at work. Once, during a client meeting, he'd heard a voice say, "She's still rehearsing." He wanted to come back. Karina told him not to. "You can't interrupt now," she said calmly, almost too calmly. "The second act hasn't finished." Josh paused. "What?" She looked down at her notebook. The list of rules had been replaced now. New pages filled with dialogue arguments, one-liners, motherly guilt, jokes that sounded like they belonged on a sitcom. She was writing them in her sleep. "I said," she repeated, her voice distant, her eyes fixed on the hallway mirror. "She's not done yet." Outside, the desert remained silent. The wind refused to stir. The glass panes reflected nothing. And inside, the woman who had once been Karina sat on the edge of her chair, script in hand, lips moving silently, waiting for the cue, for the lights, for the final scene. Not yet delivered, not yet ready to end. Josh returned on a Monday morning in late October. The desert had cooled just slightly, enough to make the stucco walls of the house feel less like a kiln. He parked across the street, engine idling, staring at the house for almost 10 minutes before stepping out. He half hoped the front windows would suddenly darken, or that some movement, even a shadow, would appear to warn him away. But the house looked still, boring even, like it always had from the outside. He noticed the green curtains again, drawn slightly open, the same ones he'd thrown away. That shook him more than he expected. He stood at the threshold with the spare key in his hand, listening. Nothing. No wind. No voices. No movement. But the moment the door opened, he felt it, that weight in the air. The dry, oppressive press of something watching. Not hateful. Not quite. But expectant. Like a camera rolling in a silent room. He called for her. "Karina." No answer. The living room smelled of lavender and powder, thick and artificial, like a room sealed for years in preparation for an estate sale. Her purse sat on the counter. Half a cup of tea rested on the coffee table, long gone cold. Beside it, her notebook lay open, revealing pages full of what looked like dialogue, long, bitter rants written in two distinct voices. One sharp, nasal, full of interruptions. The other quiet, apologetic, trying to reason. He flipped through it. Some of the lines were dated. Others weren't. A few pages were scribbled over violently, as if she tried to blot out whole conversations. But what unsettled him most was a simple sentence at the bottom of one page, written in a careful, looping hand he didn't recognize. "I was never done being heard." He found her in the bedroom, sitting in the wooden chair, facing the mirror. She didn't turn when he entered. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her eyes locked forward, unblinking. The reflection showed her just as still, but the room in the mirror no longer matched the one behind her. In the reflection, the walls were covered in old photos, black and white headshots, framed newspaper clippings, faded fan mail pinned in neat rows. The bed was gone, replaced with a vanity table and an old-fashioned rotary phone. Beside the chair where she sat, a faint outline shimmered, a figure blurred, but present, leaning close to Karina, whispering something over her shoulder. Josh's breath caught. He stepped forward. "Karina." She blinked finally but didn't look at him. Instead, she raised one hand and pressed a single finger to her lips. She was mouthing something now, a line, repeating it, over and over. He stepped beside her and looked directly into the mirror. What he saw stopped his heart cold. It wasn't Karina sitting beside him in the reflection. It was Estelle. Not as she had looked on Seinfeld. Not a caricature. She looked older, worn, alone. Her mouth moved in time with Karina's, like a puppeteer guiding her through the scene. But her eyes, they stared directly into his. Unblinking, furious, heartbroken. That night, Josh packed a single suitcase and left. He didn't speak to Karina again. Not in person. Not by phone. A week later, he filed a report with a local wellness unit, requesting a check on her. The officer who visited the home wrote that the woman inside appeared lucid but deeply immersed in some form of immersive theatrical performance. When asked her name, she reportedly responded, "I'm Estelle's understudy now. I'm here to finish the part." The officer didn't press. She wasn't harming herself. The house was quiet. Legally, there was nothing to be done. By Christmas, the house was vacant. No for sale sign ever went up. The listing vanished quietly, with no forwarding information for Karina or Josh. Some neighbors assumed they'd split and moved back north. Others whispered that the house had finally claimed her. One brave delivery man who dropped a package off late in December swore the front door opened slightly before he knocked. No one was there, but he heard laughter from down the hall, light and quick, like an old sitcom. When he turned, the mirror by the entryway briefly reflected two women, one seated, one standing behind her even though the room was empty. He never returned. As of today, the house remains technically owned, though property taxes have not been paid in over 6 months. It sits locked and silent beneath the desert sun. But locals say lights still flicker inside on some nights, that the curtains move even without wind. And sometimes, if you listen closely from the sidewalk, you'll hear a woman rehearsing her lines. One voice, then another. The same argument delivered again and again. It never finishes. It never resolves. The house waits. The stage remains set. And somewhere, deep inside, Estelle Harris finally found the one thing no actress in life ever truly gets. An endless rehearsal. Forever. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.